Hello everyone, and welcome to Lesson 8 of the Makeblock Steam Onboard course. We have been having tons of fun learning programming, and by now we should all be able to do some pretty awesome stuff, like design basic games and make simple cartoons. My name is Riyaadh Mayet from the uTyala STEM Institute, and I will be here to guide you through Lesson 8, which is about a running moth. Before we begin with Lesson 8, here is a quick review of all the things we learned in Lesson 7. The first thing we learned was how to use a conditional statement to make the computer do something only if certain conditions are met. If statements are usually followed by some condition, defined in the blue sensing conditional blocks, which can sense whether the sprite is doing something, such as touching the mouse pointer or touching the edge of the stage area. The next thing we learned was how to make the sprite do certain actions if the conditions are met, such as bounce when it reaches the edge of the stage area. Remember, you can make the sprite rotate in a left-right direction, an up-down direction, as well as have no rotation at all. The last thing we learned was how to add different backgrounds, and how to switch between these backgrounds using the next backdrop and set backdrop to blocks, which are found under looks. In the previous lesson, we traveled all around the world with Parrot Ghetto. We watched the documentary, A Parrot's Travel, and then learned how to write the program for it. Do you remember some of the new blocks we learned about last week, and what effects these blocks have in a computer program? When the green flag is clicked, we are able to see the panda. However, if the mouse touches the panda, then the panda disappears. It's always perilous and dangerous in a forest. During a dark night, a little moth went out to find something to eat by itself. Suddenly, it meets a poisonous bat. If the moth touches this poisonous bat, it will die. Let's help this little moth to escape from the poisonous bat. To help the moth escape from the dangerous bat in the dark, perilous forest, I'm going to show you a game called a running moth. The rules of the game are as follows. Use the key up, down, left and right arrows on the keyboard to control the movement of the moth. If the moth touches the poisonous bat, it will fall down from the sky and the game will be over in 1 second. Let's see who can help the moth survive the longest. To show you how it works, I have taken a short video of me playing the game. A conditional statement is a feature of computer programming that will trigger certain actions only if some specific conditions are met. In the game that I was just playing, conditional statements are used to control the moth and the bat, as well as what happens when they come into contact with each other. The words if and then are often used for conditional statements. A number of judgment conditions are used to make this fun game. Similar to the program of See My 72 Changes, the sprite of this game is also controlled by using the keys up, down, left, and right on the keyboard. In that lesson, we used event class blocks to control the effects of the game. In this lesson, we will learn another way to control the effect of the game, using conditional judgments. For this little moth, we need to make the following judgments. If the up key is pressed, the little moth moves up. If the down arrow key is pressed, the little moth moves down. If the left arrow key is pressed, the little moth will move left. And if the right arrow key is pressed, then the little moth will move right. Finally, if the moth touches the poisonous bat, then the moth will fall down. The next question we need to answer is, how do we make the little moth face different directions? For this, we need to use a new motion block called point in direction. The function of the point in direction block is to specify the direction that the sprite faces. The direction can be adjusted by clicking in the block and dragging the direction pointer. It can also be changed by inputting a numerical value, in which 90 stands for facing to the right hand side, minus 90 stands for facing to the left hand side, 0 stands for facing up, and 180 stands for facing down. These work like directions on a compass. In the example given on the right hand side, the sprite will point downwards if the down arrow is pressed. Remember, a downward direction is given by a numerical value of 180. In order to design the game for a running moth, we are first going to learn how to make the moth move up by pressing the up arrow key, how to make the moth move down by pressing the down arrow key, as well as how to make the moth move down when it touches the bat. So the first thing that we are going to do is go to our sprite area and make sure that there are no sprites there, so we can go ahead and delete our panda. Cool. And we're going to add our bat and our moth. So to add the moth, we need to search for bug 2. That's this moth over here, the little moth. Click OK. And there's our moth in our design space. We're going to click add again to add the bat, and we're just going to search for bat. There's 4 options. We're going to choose the third one because it has multiple costumes, so it looks like it's flying. So we can click OK there. Cool. So now we have our bug and our bat in our sprite area. We're going to click on our bug because we want to write the program for the bug. So to begin the program, we need an event. And as usual, we are going to choose the when the green flag is clicked block. The next thing we're going to do is select a forever loop to ensure that our program carries on and on and on until we tell it to stop. Then we are going to use an if-then statement inside our forever loop to instruct the moth that if the up arrow is pressed, then it should move upwards. So in order to detect whether the up arrow is pressed, we can go to sensing and choose if key pressed. We can change our space to up arrow. So if the up arrow is pressed, then what needs to happen? We want our moth to point upwards. So for that, we need to go to motion and we need to determine his direction by going to point in direction block. We can select this block and put it after then. Remember, we want him to point upwards. So if you click here, you can change the indicator to 0. That means if the up arrow is pressed, then the moth will face upwards. Now that the moth is facing upwards, we want him to move in that direction. So we're going to choose the move block from our motion blocks. And we're going to change the steps to 5 because we don't want him to move too much or off the screen if we just press the arrow a few times. Now we are going to repeat this if-then loop in order to make the moth go downwards if the down arrow is pressed. So for that, we can choose another if-then loop and attach it under this if-then loop. And now we need to sense whether the down arrow is pressed. So we can choose if key is pressed, and in this case we want the down arrow. So if the down arrow is pressed, then we want our moth to face downwards. So we're going to change his direction. So we can go to motion and choose the point in direction block. Because we want him to face downwards, we can click in the point in direction block and drag our indicator to 180. So now if the down arrow is pressed, then our moth will move downwards. Similarly, we want him to actually move downwards and not just face downwards. So we're going to put a move step, and we can change this to 5 to make it the same as that one. So now we have learned how to instruct our moth to move up and downwards. But now, what happens when our moth touches our bat? Remember, the moth will die if it touches the bat. So for now, all we want to do is make our moth move downwards every time it senses the bat. So for that, we are going to use another if-then statement under this if-then statement. And we're now going to sense whether the moth is touching the bat. So if touching block, we can change the mouse pointer to bat 1. It will automatically be an option. Then we want our moth to face downwards. So in order to make the moth face downwards, we can go to motion and choose the point in direction block. Remember, we want him to go downwards, so we can change the indicator to 180, which indicates downwards on a compass. Similarly, we want him to move downwards and not just face down. So we are going to choose the move function, and we're going to change it to 5 steps so that it's similar to the other two. The only thing that's missing now is that when the moth touches the bat, it will move 5 steps downwards. So end up somewhere about here. Now, for the game, we want our moth to seem like it's falling out of the sky. So we want it to fall continuously. For that, we are going to use a repeat function. And we're going to repeat moving down 5 steps 10 times. So actually what happens is he will move down 50 steps. Cool. So now our code is complete, and we can go to the full screen mode in order to see what happens when we press each of the arrows and what happens when we touch the bat. So here's our full screen mode. So we've clicked the green flag. So if you press down, then your moth moves downwards. And if you press up, then your moth moves upwards. If the moth touches the bat, then it will continue to move downwards. But we haven't seen how this works yet. So for now, if you press down, he moves down. And if you press up, then the moth moves up. We have basically finished the sprite program of the moth through the above procedures. Next, let's see what's the program of the bat like. Remember that the game will stop when the bat touches the little moth. And the so-called game over is to stop all the instructions. Here we need to use a new block called stop all. The stop all block is an orange control block, and its function is to stop all scripts of the program and end it automatically. There is no need to press the red stop button in the full screen area. In the example shown on the right hand side, if the moth touches the bat, then all the scripts will be stopped and the game will be over. We are now going to use the stop all control block to write the code for the bat. Remember, if the bat touches the little moth, then the game must be stopped. So to program the bat, we need to select bat 1 from our sprites in order for us to go to the coding area. And then we need to choose an event to start the program. So we're going to choose the when the green flag is clicked, as we usually do. Now in the beginning of the game, our moth is at the bottom left and our bat is in the top right. So in order to make the bat move towards the moth, it needs to point in the direction 45. 45 is between up and right. So we're going to go to motion and make our bat point in the direction 45. So you can see where it's along this way here. Now, after our bat is facing the right direction, we want our bat to move towards our moth in a right and left hand style. So for that, we are going to choose the set rotation style to be left and right. So our bat's gonna point in this direction and it's gonna move this way diagonally. The next thing we're gonna do is create a forever loop to make our bat's movements continue until the game is stopped. So once our bat is facing in the correct direction, we want our bat to move towards our moth. So we can choose a move block from motion and put it inside our forever block. 10 steps is again too much, so we're going to choose 5 steps. But by the time the bat moves 5 steps, it would probably have reached the end of the stage area. Now we don't want the game to stop. We want it to bounce at the edge of the stage area. So for that, we're going to use one of the blocks that we just learned in the previous lesson. If on edge bounce. We can join that under our move block, and now our bat will continue moving all around the stage area by bouncing every time it comes to the edge. The next thing we're going to do is add an if-then statement in order to know whether the game must still be played or whether the game must be stopped. So we can add our if-then statement after if on edge bounce within our forever loop. Now, the condition for the game to stop is that if the bug touches the moth, then the game will stop. So we need to sense whether the bug is touching the moth. So for that, we can go to sensing and we can choose the touching block and put it after if. And then we can change our mouse pointer to bug 2. So if the bat is touching the moth, then something needs to happen. Now, according to our rules, what needs to happen is that the game needs to stop. But we don't want the game to stop immediately. We want a bit of a delay in between, so we're going to put a wait block after that, and we're going to wait for a half a second before ending the game. Right. So now we need the final instruction that when the bug touches the moth, we should wait 5 seconds and then end the game. So to end the game, we're going to use the stop all block that we just learned about. It can be found in the control category, and we can put the stop all block after our wait. Now we have the complete program for the bat. Let's go to the full screen area to see what happens when the moth touches the bat. So we can go there and we can click on our green arrow. So every time the moth touches the bat, the moth will fall down and die. Together, we are now going to write the complete program for the game that I showed you in the beginning of the lesson. We are going to use all the new and interesting blocks that we have been learning about. There are some important requirements to take note of before we begin. Number 1. The little moth always appears at the bottom left of the stage area every time the game begins, while the bat appears in the top right-hand corner. Number 2. When the game starts, the bat will start flying only after 1 second, so that the little moth or the game player has time to get ready. Number 3. In order to animate the effect of the flying for the bat, different costumes of the bat have to be shifted continuously during the game. We are now going to write the complete program for the game that I showed you in the beginning of the video. The name of the game is a running moth. The first thing we need to do is give our game a suitable background. So we're going to go to the background tab and add another costume by clicking on the plus icon. We want to search for Forest Night. And I'm going to choose Forest Night number 4. Although in this case it doesn't really matter which one you choose. So now our forest looks dark and dangerous as it was described. The next thing we are going to do is alter the code for our bug or our moth in order to make it suitable for the game. We want our moth to appear in the bottom left corner in the start of the game. In order to make the moth appear, we can choose the show block from the looks that we learnt about in lesson 7 and place it after the when the green flag is clicked block. The next thing we are going to do is send our moth to the bottom left corner by using the goToXY function from motion. So we're going to choose this block and attach it after our show block. The X value for the bottom left is -206 and the Y value is -150. The last thing we want to do before we start our forever loop is resize our sprite so that it looks smaller than the bat. To do this, we can go to looks and choose the set size to function. We're going to join this beneath our goToXY and change it to 30% so that it is roughly a third of its original size. The next decision we need to make is to determine what will happen to our moth when the game is over. In the previous program, when our moth died, it simply fell to the bottom of the screen. For the sake of the game, we want our moth to disappear when the game is over. We can do this by selecting the hide function from the looks tab and placing it at the end of our program within the last if-then statement. The next thing we are going to do is add 2 more directions so that when we press the right arrow, our moth moves to the right, and when we press the left arrow, it moves to the left. To do this, I'm first going to take out this if-then statement just to make it easy to construct. We're going to make the 2 directions in the exact same way that we made the previous 2 directions. We can begin by choosing an if-then statement from the control and attaching it to the previous if-then statement. We then need to sense what key we're going to press in order to carry out the action. In this case, we want to press the key right arrow to make our sprite move to the right. In order for our sprite to move to the right, he first has to point in the right direction, and for that we can choose the point in direction 90 from our motion block. Not only do we want our sprite to point in the right hand direction, but we also want him to move in that direction. And for that, we can choose the move steps function from the motion category. We're going to change the steps to 5 steps to keep it constant with the other directions. We're going to repeat this process in order to make the left direction instruction. So we're going to choose another if-then statement and connect it to the previous one. We are going to sense if the left key is pressed by choosing the key pressed function in the sensing blocks and changing space to left arrow. So if the left arrow is pressed, then we want our sprite to point to the left. So we can point him in the direction of -90, which corresponds to the left. You could also just change the indicator to go to -90. Don't forget that not only do we want him to point in that direction, but we also need him to move in that direction. And so we're going to add a move function and change it to 5 steps to keep it similar to the other functions. The last thing I'm going to do is just reattach this piece inside my forever loop. And there you have the complete program for the moth in order to play the game. The next thing that we need to do is to alter the code for the bat in order for it to also play the game. I'm going to leave this code here for a few seconds so that you can see if it matches your code. The next thing that we need to do is change the code for the bat in order for it to play the game. So under the Sprites tab, we're going to click on bat 1 in order to open the design area for the bat. Let me just make it a bit bigger. The first thing that we want to do is give our moth some time to run away when the game begins. For that, we are going to wait 1 second before the bat starts to move. And for that, we can use the wait function in the control area. I'm going to attach the wait function above the point in direction tab so that it happens at the beginning of the game. At the beginning of the game, we also need our bat to appear in the top right corner. In order for our bat to appear in the top right corner, we need to use a show function from looks right at the beginning of the program. So I'm going to select show and attach it right after the events block when the green flag is clicked. So now what will happen is when the program is started, the bat will be shown in the top right corner. It will wait 1 second and then start to chase the moth. Just like how we made the moth disappear when it touched the bat at the end of the game, we want the bat to disappear when it touches the moth at the end of the game. And so we are going to use a hide function, which is also from looks. We are going to insert the hide function just before the stop all function so that our bat disappears before the game is over after it touches the bug. The next thing that we need to do is make sure that our moth, or rather that our bat, is in the top right corner. In order that this doesn't get confused with the other instructions, we are going to open a new event by choosing the when green flag is clicked function. The next thing that we're going to do is send our bat to the top right corner. To do this, we can use the go to XY function from the motion category and attach it beneath the newly used event block. We're going to set the X value to 192 and the Y value to 145 because this corresponds to the top right corner. The next consideration is that we want our bat to look like he is flying. And for this, we need to continuously switch between costumes. For the continuous switching, we are going to use a forever loop, and we're going to change his costume by selecting next costume from the looks tab. Between changing costumes, we want a certain delay. So we are going to choose the wait function in the control tab and change the value to 0.2 seconds. The reason why we are making the time shorter is so that it appears that our bat is flying. Now that we have all the code done for our moth as well as for our bat, we can go to full screen mode and hopefully play the game. In order to upgrade the game, you can change different things like the background and the effect that happens when the moth is caught. For example, the show and hide blocks can be used to make both the bat and the moth disappear when they touch each other. Another effect you could do is to change the size of the characters when the game is over. I would love to see your version of the self-designed game, A Running Moth. I also want to encourage you to think about how you can improve on the original game design. But for now, it's quiz time, and we have 4 questions to answer. Question 1. From the following options, which block can stop the action of all sprites? Question 2. Which block combination is used to animate the effect that the character is falling down from the air? Question 3. Read the following programs and answer the question. When pressing key C, what will the character say? Question 3.2. Pressing which key can realize the effect of stop all running programs immediately? That brings us to the end of Lesson 8 of the Makeblock Steam on Board course. Don't forget to share your programming journey with us at the uTyala STEM Institute using Facebook and Instagram. Please support us by liking this video and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Until next time, good luck.